Good evening. This is the Midwest Center, Richard Oliveto, coming to you. We are doing a quick message tonight. I'm going to speak about a concern that there's so much to cover when it comes to what's happening in this country right now, and civil rights and constitutional rights, and what you have happening in the courts, what you have happening in the UN, or the United States attitude towards the UN, towards what's going on in Israel and Gaza. And it has a direct bearing on how we're perceived around the world in our nation's founding principles and our first rights. They call it first principles. There's so much to talk about, and so many voices are out there and are rightfully speaking up and protesting, and hundreds of thousands have been in the streets. You have Bernie Sanders talking about the oligarchy. You have others just on YouTube and around the social media, so much speaking out against specific court cases that a U.S. Supreme Court has decided that have given Trump so much power, unlike any other president has had in recent memory. And what the focus we want to focus on here is when a president begins to act as if he's not bound as a third branch, but he's the top branch. He's the superior branch of government. He's violating the whole concept of Adams and Jefferson's and Madison's balance and what they conceived of back in 1776. He's doing absolute violence. He knows what he's doing at this term. He's got some legal scholars around him that are feeding this. And what's sad is you have a supplicant Supreme Court that's allowing him to do it in many respects. You got people like Clarence Thomas, who's an excuse for a federal Supreme Court justice. He's an embarrassment and would have ugly replacement for the great Thurgood Marshall, who truly was a lion and an eagle in terms of this nation's civil rights history. He personally changed the whole entire segregation system in the South when it came to education. And then on the Supreme Court, he was a fierce advocate for criminal defendant rights and holding prosecutors to the limits of constitutional power. Clarence Thomas sadly is the opposite, along with all of his arch-conservative cohorts. For the most part, they have stripped away so much of the Warren Burger Court and the protections that have developed over the years, painstakingly developed. So what I'm concerned with tonight is the connection between international law and American civil rights. And the reason why I bring this up is I was in a case that went national. I was only in the case 3 days. It was a young African-American man in Warren, Ohio, who was horribly beat by 3 white cops and was caught by a friend of his who happened to have a Sony cam and picked it up and started filming this beating. That video went, today they would call it viral, but we didn't have quite yet the cell phone or the internet that we have today. So what happened was, within a couple of days, an ABC news journalist in Youngstown put it up on her program, and the ABC picked it up and went all the way to New York. And by the time I was on the case, only 3 days, Good Morning America and Diane Sawyer called and wanted to know if we can show the video, and the client agreed. So we were on, it was a hot summer, it was 2003, and Lyndall Kimball's Rodney King-like police beating was coast to coast. And we were on numerous feeds, national news stories, and the video was playing all over Ohio in every major city, and it was heating up the country. And Bush had just declared victory in the Iraq War, mission success on an aircraft carrier that week. This went up. It was July 3rd. of 2003. The reason why I bring that up is when asked by Diane Sawyer about the implications of that case, and given the context that we were in at that moment internationally, I made a comment. I said, she said, what do you suggest, Mr. Libido, as to how we deal with this? And I said, well, we have to connect the dots between putting democracy in downtown Baghdad and making sure we ensure it in downtown Warren, Ohio. And I think some of the people didn't get it. I think it stunned the Good Morning America crew, and it led to more interviews. But I really felt that it just came out of me, because the way America leads the world is through its higher examples, not through force, even though that's been the military and industrial neocon process, I would say, since Kennedy was shot and killed, and prior to that, even long before that, with the assassinations around Latin America and the Mideast, and the dethronement of normally elected leaders, democratically elected leaders, that our CIA made sure they were never to hold office for too long before even Kennedy was killed. But what you have is a real serious deterioration of what it means to have these precious human freedoms that were literally first conceived politically in America by our founding fathers, and then strongly advocated through the abolitionists and fought for, ending up in the Civil War. And we all know about Abraham Lincoln and how he viewed the struggle of Union, how the Union was fighting a titanic, universal war for human freedom, not just here in the United States, but across the globe, the entire world. It was the last best hope for mankind, as he called it, and it really was, and it really is still. So what happens in America oftentimes, in a major influential way, like a wind blows across the world, or like you might say, like a good infection or a bad infection, it literally goes across the world. So now we're seeing, because of Donald Trump's election and his rhetoric against immigrants, his actions with ICE, and the deterioration, his assault on freedom of speech, his assault on fundamental civil rights, police misconduct cases being withdrawn that were well developed by the Justice Department under Biden and prior, entire investigations being shut down against cities like Louisville Police Department, or out west in Arizona and California, literally just ending those investigations because he wants to play politics, disregarding this federal law that a bipartisan Congress passed that's been applied for over 25 years across this country repeatedly. Scholars have written poems about it. Police chiefs are getting used to it, and we're advising their police departments and their commanders on how to abide by the constitutional requirements of this law. Trump just says we're not going to enforce anymore the 1441 police misconduct law. And joining that with his stance, let's say, which pre-existed also with the Biden administration, but the idea that we go to the UN and we're the only country in the UN that will not sign on to a ceasefire. We're the only major country in the world that will not support breaking the blockade to a starving population. The fact that we're the only major player in the world, not even Russia or China or Australia or India or even now the UK even, are voting with us. We are literally holding up the genocide. We are literally complicit in the genocide against the Geneva Convention and international laws, protocols that require all means necessary by every member state of the UN to do anything they can and everything they can to prevent the promotion of a genocide. Here we're selling arms to Israel that are being used to destroy and kill not only the children and the women, but the entire little culture of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. So what we're here to advocate is to say that what you do unto others, it'll come back to you. And basically what's happening is we have a rise, as many, many voices here on the internet and social media have said, we have a rise of American Mussolini, American Napoleon, not as bright as a Napoleon, not as efficient as Mussolini, but definitely an American fascist, an American racist president, and more importantly, all across the country, we have the political failure of the left, complete failure of the left to stand up to what's happening in Congress and what's happening in Gaza. They too have been complicit with the genocide, and by funding and by allowing the arms to be sold to Israel. But what that does then, they also take a very uneasy enforcement path to American constitutional rights. And so what you have is a very muscular, violent, damaging approach to American civil liberties towards college students, college professors, college universities themselves, major universities, and First Amendment violations, suppressing the free speech of protest. And what you see is, in following in lockstep, the state legislatures and the state courts that are in the red states can't pass laws fast enough in parallel with Trump's executive orders, all in an effort to gain his favor politically, gain his donor class, so they can make sure they're within the fold. It's ugly, and it's a very dangerous time in America, and it's one that, having done civil rights work for 16 years in the courts in 5 or 6 different major federal courts, and having done the same in Minneapolis federal district courts, and in Virginia federal district courts, and Court of Appeals in Ohio, Court of Appeals in St. Louis, since Federal Court of Appeals. Having done these cases and knowing how fragile and how complex the work is to assert an individual's civil rights back in the day when there wasn't a Donald Trump on the saying the things he's saying. There was no MAGA movement. It was complex then. Today, what we have is a very, very dangerous situation. And President Biden, in his last address to the United States, on his last days on it, people called him imbecilic and senile, and he was having trouble. He gave a speech that said it all. He said, we're facing the contest of democracy. And he was right. And no sooner than Trump was sworn into office, he began the assault on pretty much every international human rights law that can be applied to Israel. And he continued that. And he also suspended the enforcement of the law that I helped kick off in the United States personally. That's why I'm here to speak. And I was, for a period of time, about 5 years in this country's recent history, from between 1997 and 2003, I was one of 2 private lawyers in the United States that helped the U.S. Justice Department start and initiate what they call the pattern and practice consent decree law. And I was able to advise other major cities, including Cleveland, Ohio's legal departments, on how to seek the Justice Department's involvement. And what's interesting is the first consent decree I was involved with was under a liberal president, Bill Clinton, Democratic president, and the second one was under George Bush, W. Bush. So it was a bipartisan approach to this nation's enforcement against police brutality. And with that, I learned something, that it's not a political issue. It should never be politicized to the degree that it has been. And now it's completely lopsided and ugly, and it's a dangerous situation what you have happening in this country. So I want to lend my voice to that, and that's why we have the Midwest Center's new podcast entering the social media wave.